Welcome to the Christian Coach Podcast, where our mission is to serve coaches through conversations so they can lead like Jesus. I'm Gian, and today's guest is Gian Mollura. He has an interesting background. I'm not going to spoil it because we're going to get into it, but he's in front of me right now. And Gian, I am so interested to hear your answer to this question. What does it mean to you to be a Christian coach?
Ooh, man, both of those words have a lot attached to it, singularly, but I think when you put them both together, being a Christian coach for me means really, to coin the phrase from the 90s, like what would Jesus do? Like, he was such an amazing leader, but not like in your face and screaming. Like, he led by example, and he just had such compassion and was able to see through so much of the layers and the shields that humans put up. And as a coach, it's one thing to have people doing the exercises or running the drills or winning the competition, but as a coach you have such an opportunity to see people at their best and their worst. And that might be, the worst might not be something that anyone else can see, and you can really speak life into them just like Jesus did. So that's what it means to me, is to really look past maybe the facade, past the Under Armour receiver gloves and the fancy shoes, and like what's really going on with the athlete in front of you.
Yeah, that's really, really good. I think that's true. Jesus looked, especially the disciples and those in contact with him, they just were so worried about their physical needs and their physical states, and Jesus would always go back to, how's your soul?
Yeah, right.
Love that. Gian, now let's go back to your childhood. Let's start over there. Did you have a nickname growing up?
So my family gave me the nickname Minner.
Okay.
As a miniature man, because he said when I was born, you wouldn't know it now, I've like long dark hair, but when I was born I had like very, very white hair, and it came in all kind of spider webby, and they said I would just sit there and I looked like a old man with like a really bad comb over, and I had this like little pot belly that I just put my hands on and would just go. So they said I looked like this like miniature old man. So I grew up being called Minner, and then in my professional career, my nickname switched to Molly.
To Molly.
For
And why is
Mollura.
that? Oh, got it.
Mollura.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One guy's last name was Wall, and I called him Wally, and he did not think that was funny, so he called me Molly, and it stuck. So it became very much like a boy named Sue kind of thing, because I used to work in a pretty machismo driven industry. When I worked in corporate, I worked in aerospace and defense.
Yeah, that must be a tough one for a man named Molly in such an environment.
Well, you you develop a sense of humor real quick, but fortunately I already had one, so it was good to go.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you worked in the aerospatial area. Did you always want to be a rocket scientist?
I always wanted to be a soldier, actually. I always wanted to serve in the military. However, I was born with very severe club foot, which is where, your feet are turned in, and it was an automatic disqualification from the military. So when I found that out, during my high school career, I was heartbroken. So I always wanted to be a soldier, and didn't really have a plan B. And truth be told, I don't know how I ended up in engineering school. I probably had some guidance counselor tell me, you're good at math and science, you should be an engineer. And I was just like, all right, whatever, fine. So went through engineering school at Penn State University, felt like the dumbest person in the room for 4 years that I was there, and just kind of fell into the job, actually. And it was a very unique skill set that got me the job in working for stuff for NASA and Department of Defense and Homeland Security.
Yeah, let's go back a little bit. And why did you want to work or serve in the military to begin with?
I mean, that is something that has always interested me just from like day one. It's just part of my programming. So like the furthest back memories I have when I was like, 4 or 5 years old, like I was running around in camouflage in the woods and playing with GI Joes. Um, it just always seemed like a good fit
Yeah.
for me. My father actually wasn't a soldier, so it's not like I
Okay.
had
Yeah,
like,
correct. You didn't have any family
yeah,
members,
no,
right?
he was a state trooper, so I was used to,
Okay. Yeah.
people in uniforms. Um, but yeah, I truly don't know. It just was always something that was always felt right, and then when it wasn't right for circumstances beyond my control, it kind of just left me rudderless.
Yeah. How was your growing up? Was your family a Christian, or did you come to faith later in life?
Oh, brother. So my family, we were Christians in the sense that we went to church on Sundays because that's what, you know, good people did.
Yeah.
And, we always felt like we were very good Christians because we would go to church, and then, if someone was trying to get ahead of us in the parking lot, we would let them go out and not give them the middle finger, which a lot of people did.
Yeah, it still do.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're like, oh, we're really good Christians because, we don't do that. But I went to Catholic elementary school, then we moved, and then I went to Catholic high school.
Okay.
And high school, like halfway through middle school and high school, was really tough for me as a person, as it is for everybody in middle school. But I took a lot of things really hard and didn't have the skills to really explain how I was feeling, or people like to like kind of see through that veil, like I was talking about, that facade.
Yeah.
So I went extremely rebellious and went to a Catholic high school, and you can imagine, an old school Catholic high school, and some rebellious punk rocker, like that's like, oil and vinegar, man. But after I graduated high school, I saw a lot of things, when it was exposed to a lot of things that were the antithesis of Christianity. So when I graduated, I was like, I not only don't want anything to do with Christianity, I don't want anything to do with religion. I saw so many things that just turned me off to it. And looking back on it now, it's like I was seeing the human flaws,
Yeah.
but I attached so much of it to just religion, to the point where if people would say they were religious or something, like I would say to them, like, what, you're not strong enough to do life on your own? So like I have a very Saul to Paul kind of story. Um, so I not only was not religious, like I stiff armed it, like I pushed it
Yeah.
away, until I had pretty much a literal come to Jesus moment after the birth of our first child in 2008. Despite like the walls of accomplishments that I had earned for like NASA and all those projects, I just never felt worthy of
Mm.
anything. I just had this deep seated self doubt. So one of my biggest fears was thinking I was going to disappoint the people that cared about me or that depended on me. And the first time I was left alone with our first child, she started crying and wouldn't take a bottle. And my wife was out. She was, she was at the store. And that like just like my anxiety hit, and it's like, see, look, that devil on your shoulder is like, see, look, you're going to disappoint this tiny human that's depending on you.
Yep.
So that started, my anxiety, pretty intense. And then, so that was like a body blow. And then a couple months later, one of my best childhood friends, intentionally overdosed and took
Mm.
his own life. And he was not only a friend, he was a year ahead of me in school, and he was someone that I always looked up to, almost like a big brother, because I have no siblings.
Mm.
So to lose him like that, and someone I looked up to, like, it just set me into this like spiral and fog, and all of my normal coping mechanisms that I had developed, which, spoiler alert, they were not healthy coping mechanisms. um they weren't working. And I just remember I was home alone one day, my wife and daughter were out, I was getting ready for work, and I was just like, I don't know how to go on, like between worrying about not being an adequate father and losing my friend. um I was like, I don't know how to go on, I don't know if I want to go on, like, what do I do? And I said the serenity prayer after over a decade of actively pushing religion, specifically Christianity,
Yeah.
away. I said the Serenity Prayer because I was at rock bottom, dude. And in that moment, as soon as I, said, and the wisdom to know the difference at the end of the Serenity Prayer,
Yeah.
I felt this warm sensation come over me from head to toe. And I thought, I've either just lost my mind and like totally cracked up, or maybe there's something to this God thing.
Yeah.
And looking back on it, like that was the moment of such intense brokenness that, I finally allowed the Holy Spirit and Jesus into my life. Because I used to say, that's where Jesus found me. It's like, no, he was always there. I
Yeah.
just was not
Correct.
letting him, right? So that day in 2009 is where I started really taking a hard look at myself. And I was showing up in the world, trying to think of a word that would fit a adjective that's appropriate for a Christian podcast. I was a big jerk.
Yeah.
Just like that.
Okay. Yeah.
And that was to protect this like veneer of perfection that I had
Yep.
created. I had such low self-esteem. And when I realized that, I started really turning my life around and apologizing to people and getting control of my anger, and started just, taking the baby steps of faith.
Yeah.
So that's how my faith journey evolved. I wish it had been easier,
Yeah.
but here we are.
Yeah. Sometimes it just takes God bringing you to a moment of complete despair
Yeah.
for him to get your attention.
Yeah.
That's really good. I also went to a Catholic school in Brazil. Never heard the word of Jesus, and moved to America, came to Liberty University, and the first day I started noticing, I'm like, this is what I've been missing my whole life. I had to travel thousands of miles away from my family to be like, oh, this is it.
Yeah. I remember the first time I went to a church service after my wife and I decided to come back to the faith. Because she was raised like I was. Like, she went to church on Sunday, played the bells and sang in the choir, but never really heard the word and the love of God. And I remember like leaving church the first time we went to one where they actually spoke about just that love that we're given. And I'm like, why do I not feel bad about myself leaving church? Normally when I leave church, I feel pretty bad and inadequate. So yeah, it was very eye-opening.
Interesting. So let's go back now to you graduate college, and then you get a job, and you talked about a specific set of skills, kind of like Liam Neeson a little bit. So what were those skills, and how did that transition happen?
Yeah, so the way that the transition happened was I call the summer of 1999 the summer of the mouse. All right. So I was getting ready to go into like my junior/senior year of college, and thought I had like the most awesome internship lined up. I was going to be an intern with Disney, like the Disney, for like their Imagineers down in Florida. Like I was going to go there and like see how they do all this stuff. And it fell through at like the last minute. And I remember like it was back in the 90s, so I hung the phone back up on the wall. For the younger listeners, like phones didn't used to be in your pocket. So I hung the phone back up on the wall, and I was living in my fraternity house, and I sat down. My buddy Bill walked in. He's like, dude, you all right? I'm like, no. Like I just lost like the golden internship.
Mickey Mouse just dumped me.
Yeah. I just got dumped the happiest place on earth, my butt. Stealer of dreams. Like. And he said, you could come be like the water sports director at this Boy Scout camp I work at. I'm like, number one, I don't wear goofy green shorts, man. I'm a rocker, dude. I don't wear goofy green. And I said, number two, I don't know anything about water sports. And he's like, we'll train you. Everyone's going to be wearing shorts. Don't worry about it. No one's going to see you. So, I decided to do that. And what I ended up doing was, before I got trained to do water sports, was I worked for the maintenance crew. So I had zero marketable skills for a maintenance crew at all. So I got all the crummy jobs. Like I was like chainsaws through the woods. My specific job, part 2 of the Summer of the Mouse was my job was to de-winterize the facilities.
Okay.
On like a 14,000 acre like Boy Scout reservation. De-winterize the facilities. Part of that job meant pull all the dead mice out of the toilets that had fallen in and drowned over the winter. That was my job. I had to pull dead. I don't even think they were rotting carcasses because the toilets were filled with antifreeze.
Yeah.
Like just dead, nasty carcasses of mice. That was my job for like a week. And I'm like, this is awful. I'm not dropping out of school. I don't care how hard it gets. So, but I was like, I'm gonna learn to drive a boat. I'm gonna learn to water ski. Light at the end of the tunnel, right?
Yeah.
And one of my other duties was I always have to scrub all the propane tanks. Like you have like a grill or fire pit. Like I'd have to scrub the rust off and like paint them. So I'm sitting out in this field with all these propane tanks with like a wire brush, and it's like 100 degrees out and they're all like leaking. And I'm like, this is an accident waiting to happen. But they come up and they're like, hey John, you psyched about going to training tomorrow? I'm like, super psyched. As stuff, super, couldn't be more excited. And they're like, yeah, about that. The guy from last year just called. He's coming back. So it doesn't make any sense to train you. And they're like, but the maintenance crew is so impressed with your Western Pennsylvania work ethic. The maintenance crew would love to keep you on. And I just have these visions of like, septic tank cleanouts in the middle of the night and what else. And I go, oh, all right, well, got nothing else lined up. And they said, well, there's another position that open. You probably wouldn't be interested. I'm like, let me hear it.
I am.
They're like, you could be director of rock climbing, but it's like, outside, it's like on a natural cliff. It's kind of like nerve wracking. I'm like, I'll do it.
Yeah.
They're like, you have any experience rock climbing? I'm like, no, I'm scared of heights, but I will do it. So I went to training, became the director of rock climbing, and it was awesome. Like it was a fantastic summer. So fast forward 2 years, whenever this company sends a job thing out to the graduating mechanical engineers at Penn State in 2000, my buddies and I are all sitting around, on wing night at the bar, and they're like, do you see that thing about like the astronaut stuff? I'm like, yeah. They're like, we should apply. We're like, yeah, we're gonna be spacemen. So I applied. It's like a joke to just say I did. And they granted me an interview on the phone. I was a decent student. I had like a 3.0, which is awesome for engineering.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
And so I do the phone interview. I'm like, I can't believe this is happening. And it was for like a project manager job.
Yeah.
Knowing what I know now about myself, like project manager, no way. Like I would have been off project manager. So I'm talking to them and they said, what's this on here about rock climbing? Because I had director of rock climbing. I managed the staff.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I was like, it shows responsibility. No one died. No one got seriously injured even. Like all the boxes checked. And I told them, and they said, hang on, someone just walked by that we want you to talk to. And I was like, okay. And like phone goes on mute. And this is before Zoom. So like I'm just
yeah. You're just sitting on the phone.
Yeah. And like comes off mute. Person doesn't introduce himself. Nasally voice goes, what do you think about rock climbing on Mars? And I go, are you going to pay my airfare? And then I'm like, oh my gosh, I just blew it. And
that's a great comeback.
Right. But I'm like, I just blew it. And this guy goes, get him down here. And then like disappeared. And they're like, well, okay, that was Skip Wilson, our director of test operations. Apparently Skip would like to meet you.
Oh.
So I came down, like not knowing my project manager, like who's Skip? Talked to this guy, and apparently Skip was the guy who ran all the testing for all the landing systems for the Mars landers in the 1990s, Pathfinder, and they were ramping up to do the MER missions that landed in 2003. So he was leading all the testing for these giant airbags that would inflate up around them. And he wanted to talk to me to be in test operations, which meant like traveling to government facilities across the world where they could like simulate Mars conditions. And he said what caught his eye was I was a decent enough student, but he said, I saw you had rock climbing on there. And he said, so I need guys or team members I can send out into the field into Timbuktu and know they're not going to get themselves killed. And it turns out he was former special forces in Vietnam. So like when he saw that, he's like, manna from heaven. He's like someone with half a brain that can do dangerous hazardous things and operations and come home alive. So that is how I ended up working in the space program. I never was a project manager. I walked in the door my first day, January 15th at 8 a.m. And I was out the door by 10:30 a.m. that same day on the way to the airport, on the way to some government test facility. So that pretty much kicked off the
Yeah.
next like 15 years of my life, which took me all across the world. I mean, I got all expense paid trips to Pearl Harbor, to work on Department of Defense stuff, Mojave Desert. I was in Antarctica for a little while. So all because, I lost that internship with
Disney.
Disney. And
Yeah.
then, just kind of took those leaps throughout my life of like, yeah, I'll do it. I'll do it.
Yeah.
Raise my Now when that happens, I'm like, okay, God, you obviously have a hand in this. I'll trust your
Yeah. Yeah.
trust your
That's
judgment. But yeah,
what an incredible story.
yep, that's the
And
long running road.
and doing some research, I now you're out of that business now, right?
Correct.
So
Yep.
what do you currently do
Right.
for a living?
Yeah, so in 2017, my wife and I prayerfully made the decision that it was time for me to leave engineering and turn my side hustle of photography into my full-time gig.
Mm.
So that's what I've been doing full-time since 2017. It started with commercial photography, and then moved into portraiture. And over the past year, I started developing keynotes and workshops on imposter syndrome.
Wow.
Because even though, like I said, I had all these accolades from, all these organizations, I never believed I was worthy of them. Like one time I got a letter of commendation from the Department of Defense. And I remember standing on stage almost in tears because I was certain, absolutely certain the president of our company was going to look at it and be like, yeah, Mollura, you actually don't deserve this. Which is like the definition of imposter syndrome, like
Yeah.
feeling like because the data was out there. Like the thing we worked on for the military was out doing its thing where it was supposed to be doing it. So once I went through my own healing journey and learned to turn the volume down of imposter syndrome, that's why I turned it into a workshop, which are in person or self-paced online. And recently I launched a men's coaching program called
Awesome.
Authentic Men of Action.
Wow, that's really, really cool. So where were you in that journey when you started really feeling the imposter syndrome? That's my first question. And then follow up with, what are some coping mechanisms that we could have, turn down techniques?
Yeah.
Because this is something that coaches struggle with constantly. I just won a national championship. I still don't feel like I'm worthy of anything. I just got this promotion in my, went from assistant coach to head coach or whatever it is. And they still don't think, especially with men. And it's hard for men to talk about it. Women, being married, I see the women's side and they talk very freely about those things and they can, the other women rally around it. With men, we truly put a guard up because we have to have this facade of, we got everything together. Like we can solve any problem.
Exactly. Which that's where that was the impetus for my coaching program. Because so many guys operate out of a place of wanting to do good, but they're just doing what they think they should do. Because what are the models that men have? It's like we're either Rambo and we can are supposed to be able to take down like an enemy helicopter with like a thumbtack and a rubber band, or the other way we're portrayed in popular culture is like Homer Simpson or like the buffoon. Guys are like that want to do good and do right by their families and loved ones and jobs. They start operating on places that are inauthentic to how they are designed. And you can only do that for so long till things start coming out sideways, with like resentment. So that's why it was real important for me to create that men's coaching program and to normalize that conversation for guys. Because like you said, guys historically aren't so good at saying, hey, I got a problem or I'm struggling with this. So I've been, building like a community of other guys that, from the outside in, people would be like, wow, those people operate at elite levels. Like I just did a Instagram live with a gentleman named William Branham. He's a 26-year veteran of the Navy SEALs. And our whole reason for doing that was I'm a former rocket scientist. He's a former SEAL. Like there's not much more elite you can get than
That's
that.
right. Yeah.
Maybe if we had like a Super Bowl champion on there or something, like
There
we
you
could
go.
affect but he and I shared our stories of, despite, you know, these tremendous accomplishments and operating at elite levels, still not feeling good enough. So to get back to your original question, about what are some techniques to turn this down, one of the things that I do, and I always encourage people to do this, is I call it like create your archive of awesome. Like write down wins. And this isn't groundbreaking. This isn't earth shattering. Like I came up with the alliteration of archive of awesome, but that's one
Yeah.
of the best things you can do is like write down little wins. And people are like, well, I was never employee of the year, or I was a high school standout in football, but that was so long ago. It's like, no, dude, like write down that you figured out how to set your car dials right, that like you could defrost your windshield, when that happens, like little victories, because when you look at those little victories and I always encourage people, go as far back as you can remember. Write down that you won the Pinewood Derby when you were a Cub Scout, when you were 7, because like fear doesn't fight fair. Like it's going to bring something up when you were 5 years old and trip you up decades later. So it's like, if fear's
Yeah.
not going to fight fair, then all right, we're going to do some guerrilla warfare tactics, and we're going to write our archive of awesome all the way back. So that's one of the best things I tell people to do, is start it in your phone, write it in your journal, or write it
Yeah.
in hard copy. Sign up for
Yeah.
my newsletter, because you get one for free. I send you the PDF that's fillable. So shameless plug.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest things you can do, is keep track of those little victories and big victories.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so true. It's, and we have John Acuff as common friend, and he talks about, joy doesn't come naturally in our brain like while we're grocery shopping, but fear does. Sense of inadequacy comes so fast, where you're just walking through the grocery store and they're like, yeah, you're not that good.
Yeah.
But it usually doesn't come like, wow, I'm grocery shopping like a boss right now, I'm
Yeah.
just mastering this.
That's
So
right.
it's yeah, it's something I think that a lot of men and women do, but men are so scared of talking about. So I'm so glad that there's someone there championing that that battle for
Yeah.
us all out there. And I know a lot of our audience will appreciate you coming out and being vulnerable yourself, sharing your story, as well as giving us some tips on how to get better. John,
Yeah.
you mentioned a newsletter. Can you tell us, how can we find you?
Yep.
Where can we find you? And maybe even how can we sign up for that newsletter?
Yeah. Yeah. That'd be awesome. So it's johnmollura.com, JOHN. I'll spell it out since it's not a normal name, MOLLURA. Just right at the top there, it says sign up for my newsletter. You click that, sign up, you'll get the archive of awesome PDF right away. And then trickled out over the next 5 days are emails, and also like little video shorts in there with me explaining like how imposter syndrome might be showing up in ways you don't even realize it. Like, spoiler alert, perfectionism is a sign of imposter syndrome. And then just some techniques, to start turning the volume down of it. So yeah, johnmollura.com, Instagram, John Mollura, Facebook, real creative, John Mollura
John.
speaking coaching. Just Google John Mollura. I think there might be like one other dude named John Mollura.
Okay. There you go. Awesome. Awesome. John, now we have our new new thing for the podcast this season is the previous guest asked a question to the next guest without knowing who that person was.
All right.
And you get a chance to do that for the next guest. Last guest question was, what is your one word for this season of life?
Surrender.
And why is that?
So I've been doing photography full time for over 6 years now, and it never really took off. Like, it was always profitable and did well enough. Like, we still have our house, and but it never like took off. And I did some real big soul searching earlier this year at the beginning of summer, and it was like, what's going on, God? I stepped out in faith. I felt like I was called to do this, years ago. Where's the bounty? Like, why is this just kind of like humming along, like existing, instead of like being fruitful? And then like my photography business like really like dried up. Like it was like wild. Like so many like things fell through. Like I was supposed to do a maternity shoot for somebody, and they're like, we're gonna have to postpone it. And it was pretty close to their due date. Turns out they had the baby on the night they were supposed to do the maternity shoot. Everyone's fine now, but it's like things like that happen. Like so many things happened that like just fell apart. And I am a facilitator for Nothing is Wasted Ministries Pain to Purpose course. And one of the things they talk about is, instead of saying like, why God, oh why, don't ask why, because that might not be, you might not need to know that.
Yeah.
What God wants you to ask is, what do I do now? What are you trying to show me, God? And like prayerfully lean into that. And so when my photography business really slowed down, like it never had before, I was like, all right, what am I supposed to do now? And it, like, God said, hey, I've put all these opportunities for you to serve men in your life, you know, leading the men's Pain to Purpose devotional course. One of my clients invited me to a group called F3, which stands for Fitness, Fellowship, and Faith. It was started in the Carolinas by former Green Beret and his buddy, because they realized men need community. So twice a week we get together and exercise at 5:15 a.m. for 45 minutes. It's all peer led. It's all men. It's all free. So that got dropped in. And then another author, his name is Johnny L. Sasser. His book got put into my life. And a lot of the work that he has you do at the end of every chapter was like pivotal. Me realizing it's like, oh, okay, I'm here to serve men in this season of my life. So I'm surrendering in the fact that I'm pulling away from the photography business and like really going in on the coaching and the speaking. And so that's where the surrender is. Just like, okay, God, I'm going to continue to follow you. Now the caveat is, it's not like I'm like, all right, God, I'm doing what you want. I'm just gonna hang out here and watch the Netflix until you know, I get a call from, you know, someone to speak to 5,000 people. It's like, no, it's like I'm out there doing the work to build that side of the business now.
Yeah, we had Jason Romano, and he was a producer for ESPN, and he talked about active patience. And he said, when you're waiting on God, don't just sit on your butt. Like go keep moving and wait, keep moving and wait. Because that's where you'll find what God is trying to tell you. Netflix, very rarely God is speaking through, to me through Netflix.
No, absolutely not. Yeah, one of the phrases my pastor said at the beginning of the summer, right when I was kind of going through all this, was he said, work your weight. And that's WAIT, not weight as in like poundage. It's like do the work while you're waiting on God.
Yeah. Awesome. That's great. John, now it's your turn. All right. What is your question for our next guest?
Oh, okay. Because I know my answer. That's why I'm laughing.
Yeah.
What is the weirdest thing you ever ate?
What is the weirdest thing you've ever eaten?
Yep.
All right. Sounds good. And what was your answer?
I'll preface this with, I was in China at a dinner they invited me to. It's a toss up between beef throat or chicken intestines. Probably chicken intestines, just for the gross factor.
That's tough. Yeah, that's tough.
It's like eating rubber bands.
In Brazil, we eat chicken hearts like regularly.
Yeah.
But when I tell people here in America, they're pretty grossed out. But to me, it's completely normal. Chicken hearts.
Yeah, hearts aren't a big deal. I've eaten lots of. I don't think I've eaten a chicken heart, beef, deer.
Yeah.
Some pig. I don't know, but yeah, but the whole intestine part.
Tough. That's tough. Yeah, that's
tough.
John, thank you so much for coming on. How can we be praying for you?
Yeah, just pray that I continue to be obedient and patient. Patience is not one of my natural skill sets. So patience and obedience.
Awesome. Let's pray real quick.
All right.
Dear God, thank you so much for John. Thank you for this conversation. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to meet together and lift up your name with our chat. Lord, I pray that as John now transitions from the photography business to coaching and speaking, side of things, Lord, I pray that he'll focus on surrender and patience and continue to lean on you every step of the way, Lord, because we know that when we work with you, Lord, our labor is not in vain. In your name I pray. Amen. John,
Amen.
thank you so much for coming on.
All right. Thanks, brother.
And listeners, always remember, the mission field is right where you're at.